Yeah, live stream test. It's just taking a bit to load the video. Oh. It says,
If everyone's ready, I'd like to call the special Mayor's Leaders Table meeting to order. Oh, sorry, Mike. There we are, green. All right, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the Mayor's Leaders Table meeting to order. Recognize that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk this morning will be Ms. Nicolina Verkar. Today's Mayor's Leaders Table meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. I don't think we've got anyone joining us electronically this morning. We have no late items. The first item being the introduction of late items. Motion for adoption of the agenda. Moved Richards. Sorry, yes, you may. Yes.
Suggest that we add an item?
Yeah.
Do I need to do this?
Yes.
There we go. Okay. Could we please put housing back on the agenda?
Okay.
I mean, my recollection of our last meeting is we agreed to carry forward the discussion, but I'd like to see it added back in.
Added in the round table, so to speak. Is that all right?
That's fine.
Yeah,
Absolutely fine.
All right, motion
With
for...
it, that I'll be happy to be second.
All right, thank you. A motion for the adoption of the agenda as amended. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion for adoption of the minutes is circulated. Moved Donna, seconded Dave. All those in favor? None opposed. Thank you. Agenda items, coordinated strategic planning for Nanaimo's key institutions. Discussion continued from March 21st meeting. Ms. Hayes, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. So you should have been sent multiple documents with your agenda today, one of which is an updated chart on what we spoke about at our last meeting, which is, I'm going to start by calling it a strategic planning session. I know we're going to move into other verbiage about what that actually looks like. I want to thank Dave for sending us documents on what a charter would look like and how it's defined, and you're going to be the first item basically as part of this discussion. And then I've added those to the chart that were sent to me. So Dave sent me a couple of comments. I've added in MIBI and the Nanaimo Foundation. Bill kindly connected me with the arts and culture rep through the city. Two people I've left off of this chart so far are the Nanaimo Arts Gallery has asked to come in under arts and culture with the agreement that Carolyn would represent all arts and culture. So museum, the Port Theatre, all of those groups would speak with one voice through one representative. So if this group was fine with adding that group to our chart, we would add them under arts and culture. And my only other thought was if we wanted to add an RDN rep in under transportation. Just that our transportation connected piece is defined in actually our reimagined document quite well. But we do get feedback from, for instance, hospital staff about timing of buses and aligning those to be able to better deal with some of the function at the hospital. And I'm sure there are other groups, university probably has some comments to make about transportation, et cetera.
Bill and then Dave, please.
Your Worship, just a clarification on the arts and culture piece, and I think the city representative is the sort of, how do I say it, the champion of culture for the entire community. That's actually in her job description. So putting one group might sort of throw the balance off a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just my suggestion.
Dave, then Richard.
Yeah, with regard to transportation, one of my students just finished a thesis project on transportation in the region and integrated transportation need for that. And you read his paper, I would absolutely fully endorse what you're saying. So I agree with you.
Okay, I'll take those comments and we can.
And Richard?
Sorry, I apologize. I missed the last meeting when this was brought forward. This is wonderful, and one of the organizations that I don't know if it was discussed at the time, but was the Nanaimo Prosperity Corp. If that needs to be considered in this.
So I would just comment that I brought Colin with me today because they're partnering with us on this entire process. And so as we go through Colin's proposal today, I think what you'll find is as we go through this process, and this process has a timeline, just so those that missed the last meeting, is that we're to be complete this by the end of the year with direct tangible takeaways in January of 2026. Though my presumption is as we move through this, I think we're going to see that the Prosperity Corp is who's going to get most of those takeaways with how are we doing that and how are we putting those together. And so they're partnering with us on this process.
Thank you.
So my one other comment, and as we then get into the nitty gritty of this, is I want to make sure a couple things. That the goal of the end of the meeting today is to walk away with a motion for City Council, so that we have a plan going to City Council that we can present at their next council meeting, and get a motion of their support to be moving forward right away in our process. And we do have some timelines and dates in the documentation today, so I just want to give us a heads up. That means we got to work through some of these things today, so we have something comprehensive to give to them at the next council meeting. The other thought that as we're working through this process that came up that Colin and I spoke about the other day is as we work our way through those that are on the chart, I think something we're going to have to keep at the back of our mind, and as we look at the donut economy, which I think this is going to provide some opportunities to provide more education in the private sector, which came out of the last mayor's meeting. And that's going to be one of the recommendations, I believe, is that the private sector and private partners get more education on what this looks like, is that who benefits versus who contributes? And does that mean there are community impact agreements that actually come out of this process at the end? And I don't think we'll know that until we get through to the December point where we're putting our recommendations and formalize pieces back together. But the conversation specifically about and I'll use the port as the example because that's me. So like if the port is contributing and right now we're doing our $130 million project, that's who is contributing, and that, you know, we have provincial and federal and municipal, it's a partnership for sure. But at the end of the day, our goal there is to provide well-paying jobs that directly impact childhood poverty in our community. So at the end of the day, who benefits? Well, though, and it does directly put into the benefit category, I believe, and only my personal opinion, the arts and culture piece as well, right? So as we provide those well-paying jobs, those people can then afford to go to a concert at the Port Theatre, or they can afford to be involved and be purchasing art. And so I just want to put that out there as a concept as we're moving forward in these discussions, because there's going to be lots of meetings going forward, and I already can tell you it's going to come up at the table, right? For big groups who are like, hey, university, we're going to invest all of this money, and we're going to be the people who are contributing, but we need to look at it as part of the donut conversation, like those that are benefiting, but how do they benefit? Right? And so they benefit by us investing in that infrastructure and providing those educational programs and those job opportunities directly in our community, that really at the end of the day, those that are on the lowest scale at the end actually all come up with community as a whole. We all benefit. So if we all work together, the thought is if we all get together, not only do we survive, we thrive. And so I'm just putting that on the table as part of this introduction piece, because I do believe it's going to come up as we start meeting with the shareholder groups and how we can, and I want that to be part of this background of discussion. I've already brought it to my port board table of, as we talk about infrastructure, I want to talk about impacts. We know how we're going to impact the Canadian GDP and what we're going to do provincially for ports and how we're going to effectively change trade and sustainability for Vancouver Island. But what does that mean? And who does that impact? And how can we impact those people? So I want to, when we put this together and I presented this, I just want to reiterate, that's part of this process. Okay, so that's my introduction. Am I good to hand it over to Mr. Whitty to? Okay.
So I'm not seeing any questions.
So Dave,
Sorry, yes, Dave?
I asked you to be put on the agenda, so we should start with the charter, because the outcome of this, so the outcome of this process in December is the idea is to have all these major shareholders in our community sign a community charter agreeing that we're working together on this process. So Dave?
Okay, thank you. Everything's in a name, right? So I'll take a few minutes and summarize what I put together. So yeah, in March, we identified the desire to explore the potential use of a charter, and I've put some thoughts together. So first of all, what is a charter? And what I know about charters comes from a lot of the work and experience I have in Europe and the research I've undertaken there related to things like green cities and successful cities and all of these other terms we use. And I ended up identifying some cities that were really leaders in these areas, and one that stands, as you know, when I talked about Freiburg, Germany, and I wanted to find out why was Freiburg so special, and so met with Wolf Dosking, who was the former director of planning for them for 30 years, super famous planner in Europe, highly regarded and recognized. And spent a great lunch with him and sketching out stuff, and it was just a wonderful lunch. And one of the things he talked to as being a direct force in their success was the notion of a charter. And so I quizzed him on that, and as a result, my presentation today. So in Europe, local government charters often focus upon broader ambitions and principles instead of detailed recommendations. And such charters provide a framework for collaboration and strategic direction at what I call the 10,000 meter level. They are not strategic plans, and they're not official community plans. They are broad agenda-based coalitions of interest, basically. So European city charters are relatively brief statements of aspiration, frequently reflect a broad consensus of multi-stakeholder input, and that's where this resonated for me, because that's what is being presented here is really much what Wolf talked about. And there's a commitment and a uniqueness developed specifically for an individual local government and the particular aspirations of that jurisdiction. So this, as you spoke, it just went, dong, yeah, this is exactly what they were looking at. So while the term charter may be used in Europe in a unique way, it's differentiated from its use in Canada. I'll talk about that in a minute. The essence of its use is still informative as it addresses collaborative, holistic approaches to community well-being. So more recently, there's been an increased debate in Canada about the role of cities in the 21st century, and it's about time. Those discussions relate to the recognition that local governments and much of the governance legislation is 100+ years old, right? And it's based on an old government model where 20% of us lived in cities and the rest lived out in the rural countryside and the bush, basically. So today there's a growing call in Canada for redistribution of decision-making and financial resources and recognition that 80% of us now do live in urban places. And with that comes a growing call for the creation of a new form of city charter that calls for a redistribution of power and revenue generation so that local governments can better address those local needs. And I referenced John Sewell. Some of you may know he was quite a dynamic mayor of Toronto for a whole bunch of different reasons. I don't know if you ever met him, but he is quite an individual. I got to meet him. But so the discussion of charters in Canada is about developing legislative change to empower local governments to address local issues and have a greater and more diverse share of revenues. So I'm suggesting that the term charter here has a different connotation. It's about words, right? We can use another word, I'm suggesting. And we know that we have the community charter in BC as well. And so the name is notionally, there's a potential merit for the creation of a European-like charter. So a European-like charter for Nanaimo, but maybe we should call it something different. The Freiburg Charter has been recognized internationally, as I mentioned, as a useful tool for identifying accountable direction for Freiburg's cross-section of interests, institutions, private and public sectors, and non-government organizations. It had, in that instance, 9 objectives, 12 principles, laid it out in a really quite a really strong graphic and report format, and people adhered to it and understood the rationale. So framing a Nanaimo charter-like conversation, I call it. Research suggests that in the Canadian context, the use of charter as a term for local government consensus and action may be a misnomer. It appears that the term charter, as used in Canada, is very different from the term used in Europe, yet the ambition, and this is key, the ambition of the term remains similar. For instance, the Nanaimo Mayor's Leaders Table has identified the need to speak to local needs, issues, and ambitions that reflect a cross-section of cultural, economic, environmental, and social considerations identified by and held in common by local government, First Nations, non-government organizations, institutions, health authorities, private sector, not-for-profit groups, educational groups, and other groups unique to the community being considered. So in this case, our community. The Mayor's Leaders Table believes that such matters are critical to the long-term well-being and function of Nanaimo. Such collective ambition is not a replacement for or in competition with our official community plan. Rather, there appears to be an opportunity to complement the OCP by collectively identifying principles, objectives, and actions that are framed by both internal needs and external influences. But if charter is not a suitable term for Nanaimo, what term might be appropriate? The Mayor's Leaders Table could be a catalyst for exploring the creation of a unique approach in Nanaimo. I think it's a great idea. Perhaps such an approach is more aptly termed an accord, a covenant, a convention, or a protocol. Such an approach could identify guiding principles that point to a future Nanaimo that sets Nanaimo apart as a special place with collectively defined and supported unique attributes and ambitions that will make Nanaimo one of British Columbia's most successful, high-quality, diverse, well-functioning cities. That work, whatever it is called, could explore the integrated relationships of a host of organizations and institutions that collectively contribute and commit to the dynamic qualities of Nanaimo that make it unique. In short, the process and documentation could be a rallying cry for action and a vehicle for advocating for Nanaimo across a cross-section of areas and governments. Yeah. Well, that was fun to do.
Thank you. So the first question that occurs to me, do you develop the language first and then determine what term best describes it, or you pick the term and then
Well, that's right. That's a good question.
create the language to fulfill the term?
Yeah, right. So we might want to use the word charter for now if you want, but the reality is if we take it publicly, it's going to confuse people, given where the conversation in the country is now about local government and an ambition to create local government. Broad charter idea.
Yeah. So I know that Colin and I talked about this, and I think you'll see in what he sent over in the agenda talks about it maybe being an accord,
Yeah,
which you had suggested
Yeah.
in your,
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those words, whatever, yeah. That works as well.
and we would need a commitment for someone at this table to work with, and I'm saying city staff, although I'm not volunteering, Bill, but with city staff on actually starting to put together what that document looks like. Now, the work piece, all of the behind the scenes stuff is gonna happen through the processes that we're gonna propose here, working with the Prosperity Corporation, but somebody at this table needs to take, so are you volunteering to
Sure,
start like putting pen to paper? And
Sure.
I don't think we want to end up with like a 30-page document,
No, no, no,
something that's
I don't.
simple and easy
Right.
that everybody's going to feel comfortable with, but we're going to have to propose something
as a framework.
as a framework to the group. And that would mean working with, I would say, working with city staff about, what would be appropriate. So I'm nominating you, Dave.
And I heard him volunteer.
Excellent.
No, I'd be pleased to do that, and I've stepped back from a number of things right in the last year, so I actually, yeah, I have the time to do it.
Mark?
Thanks.
And sorry, and yeah, I was ill last time when this conversation began. I just structurally have a question. So I'm a bureaucrat. I don't have the ability to bind my board in anything. And so there's one thing to sit here and then, we go for coffee and we come up with a child kit, like all of the folks are making sure we're hearing what's going on so we can connect. Oh, you're doing housing, we're building a school, can we do, but an accord or a charter for, I can't commit my board to anything like that.
I can't. I'm sure Richard can't. We're all in the same boat.
And then on the other side, one of the debates that our board is often having is that they're being called in to do 97 different things. Like our core mission is K-12, and now it's going to be childcare as well, and we're going to do that. And so, I mean, of course, I'm happy to deliver the idea, but like if to sign on to something formally, the board would have to approve, and that's just would be one of their considerations.
So I just want to comment, I think that's understood, because we're all going to be in the same boat, right? Like I can't sign for I can sign for the Port Authority, but like Ian can't, who will attend and do the piece on the port piece, can't assign for the Port Authority either. So I think the thought is, with the processes we're going to introduce, is that, and forgive my lack of tact, but that the worker bees will be in the room. And so I'm going to say this up front, is that I don't think when I write city on here that a city councillor is coming to the two sessions we're going to propose. I believe it's they're city staff people who are then going to go back to our boards, keep our boards informed about what we're working on and what our intents are and what we're working towards. So I would say start that early to say, hey, I've been invited to attend this. And this is sort of the outcomes, and we can provide a white paper on what that actually is, and then work through the process and then come to the end where our boards will have to sign, yes. Or, yeah.
Dave?
Yeah, and I think, these are about discussions, not commitments at that particular table, but identify an opportunity, and then from that it moves back. And there will be some points where this will have to go back to get approval. As you say, the worker bees will be working on it, and that, it's not unlike a lot of the work that's done now. And as a consultant, I used to kind of do that, and I was empowered as a consultant to do a bunch of stuff and then go back and go, this is what's recommended. And they go, no, throw you out the room, or they say, yeah, great job, right? So I don't think it's dissimilar. The caution's there, and I think it's, as Donna says, that's part of, this is how we're going to get through it and do it, because the doing needs to be done before those who approve can approve. So, I see it as a natural process.
I think it's going to be organic, Mark, quite like our conversation on daycare came about. Like, that's been a great outcome. But like, as I've said when I met with Robin, is that, like, I want the school district to stand up and be able to say, like, how are we unique and stronger in Nanaimo? Well, we're unique and stronger in Nanaimo because the school district actually understands and is participating in the healthcare conversation. How are you doing that? Well, you're actually doing it through one of your core mandates already, right? But it's those ties that are going to create other opportunities. And I think even at the worker bee table, we're going to find that there's a whole bunch of opportunities that we're not recognizing until we all start talking at the same table, right? And some of those opportunities are going to take a lot of hard work and money and investment to actually have outcomes, and that's why we want the Prosperity Corp to be part of that conversation. You know, like, I'm not going to be shy in saying that I'm going to ask VIU that we'd love to see a cancer tech program established in Nanaimo directly tied into our new cancer center that's coming. But that's going to involve a whole bunch of money and a whole bunch of hard work. But the truth of the matter is that conversation doesn't happen in seclusion and on its own. And I don't think, this is only my opinion, that VIU can actually create that program without critical and core support from BC Cancer, from Island Health, from the Hospital Foundation, and so on, for all of us being at the table. I think that makes that conversation a lot easier when there are partners at the province speaking to why a program should be funded through our university. And so that's what the table is hoping to open up and create those opportunities. All of us at this table have filed through the last Mayor's Leaders Table our major core projects. So we already have a document that says what we think the core projects are. Well, what are the impediments standing in the way of those core projects happening? We can suss those out together as all being at the table, and maybe it needs something creative and some other type of strategic partnership that maybe gets us over the finish line on those things and gets us the recognition that we need. And I think that this is part of this, is like, how are we getting other levels of government to recognize that there is this huge opportunity in Nanaimo, and there's massive opportunity here. All of these things, whether we're talking about tariffs or supply chain issues that are specifically happening right now, those are just opportunities for us to grow. And so realizing those and putting them into context and how we can realize those things, that's part of what this process is about. And my hope is that as we actually do that, defining who Nanaimo is the harbor city and then whatever that next line's going to be, that's what we're going to sell as a community to whatever groups, whether it's another level of government or whoever it is, that we need to get their support to have that investment here. And I think some of that investment is going to come from other places in the world. Right? Because we're going to have a model of excellence, and we're going to know who we are, and we're going to have these partnerships ready to go, and then we're actually going to have a team that's going to be able to go out and create those other connected pieces that we need to get us over the finish line. So not only, as I said earlier, not only do we survive, we thrive, but we thrive together, all of us. That's the intent. And I do know there's going to be complicatedness with getting boards to sign off and this is a short time frame to make something happen. And we're hoping that, you know, that most organizations, well, I'd like to say 100% of the organizations will be like, yeah, hey, that's where we need to be. We need to be working together. So that's the goal.
And if I may say, it's interesting that I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned now, but it is an outgrowth of what we did before. Yeah.
It's definitely a continuation. We're not starting with nothing, right? Like, the Reimagine Nanaimo process actually had to happen before we were here. And the city's master plan, city plan has some points that we actually need to tie back into this so it's complete. But we needed all of that before we could actually get here.
The juices are flowing.
Mm-hmm. Do you want us to work on the next point?
Please.
So I have sat down a couple of times with Colin now to put together a work plan, and you were all sent a document in your package called, I don't know what it's called in this. Did it change names in this? Anyways, it says Towards a Nanaimo Accord, a shared vision for action. So I'm going to ask Colin to actually step in. I just want to make a couple of key points. So how we see this rolling out is between now and the end of the year. We see it as 2 strategic sessions. The first will be a session where there is a letter basically sent from Colin and myself inviting these key stakeholders, because most of them, you folks are all at the table, so you're part of those groups, but the other groups, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2, I've already spoken to all of them about this process. So getting them all in a room to introduce them to this idea, what we hope outcomes are. We have documents we can bring to that meeting. Like we have what they shared as strategic, what their main infrastructure plans were, for instance. So we have all of that documentation already. But basically it would start with an initial meeting of those groups, which is not facilitated by an outside facilitator. It's an invitation basically from this group to sit in the room with us and talk about what the concept is and what the outcomes are. It's maybe a 2-hour meeting at the most to ask them to join the process and be committed to the process and bring up things like Mark is saying, hey, I've got a board I've got to answer to. How am I going to deal with that? Right? So to bring up any of those concerns so we know what they are moving into the more formalized process. And we're hoping to get that done before October. And then with some goals, and I'm actually gonna let Colin speak through that. The second event would be a much longer event, which would be a facilitated event where we start doing project definitions, agreement on what main issues are, and the definition of Hunanaimo, like what that actually looks like. That would be a facilitated event. One thing that Colin brings up in his documents that I want to quickly speak to is about public consultation. So what are we doing about public consultation? My comment to Colin on that, and the group can say how they feel or not about it, is that that's actually happened. The Reimagine Nanaimo process was completely and totally a public consultation process that involved all members of the public. It was over a longer period of time. And so because part of our work plan is using that document to kind of bounce off of and get started, we feel we've already done the public consultation piece. We don't need to go through that again and take that back to move forward with this. So unless somebody has a concern with that, I'm bringing that up now because if you have a concern with that and think we haven't done that, I would need to know that. But I feel that we've already gone through that. The second piece before Colin comes on to talk a little bit more about the plan is that we believe the plan's going to cost $50,000 to $60,000. And my question to Colin is, okay, who's paying for that? So when we go to council for a motion of support, we are actually not asking council for this money. Colin is going to explain that Prosperity Corp has some money in their budget and why he feels it meets their criteria that could go towards this. So this process is not asking, just so we're clear, this process is not asking council to give us $50,000 to $60,000 for a process. We believe that that funding is in place. And the other thing I want to make clear, and we'll make it clear to the stakeholders that come to the meeting, we're also not asking them to put in money. They're not coming to the process for them. They're not coming because we're asking them for money. That's not what it's about. This is about us helping them and all of us together. So I just want to address those things right up front so that there's no question moving forward. But I could maybe ask Colin now to walk us through what the process that he's 99% put together and walk us through what that looks like.
Let me just interject here and say there's a part of me that says if you don't have quote unquote skin in the game, I think is the phrase, or money in the table, maybe you're not going to be as committed to this. So I throw that niggling little doubt out there. Not that I can commit the city's money, and if you come to council, whether they'd be parsimonious or generous, I'd like to think they'd be generous, but I just leave that out there.
I believe your council will say that the Prosperity Corporation's money is their money.
Yes.
And that the Prosperity I'm not going to speak for Colin, but the Prosperity Corporation has a mandate. We do believe this process, Colin will explain, that this fulfills part of that mandate. And while I say we're not asking them for money for this process, I think the outcomes of this process will require next year for people to put in money and will actually form the basis for Prosperity possibly to ask for more money in the next year. And I'm happy to explain you know, say that to council and say, you know, we're not saying across the board that we're never going to ask for money. What we're saying is for this part to get to where we need. And that's just when we talked about it, but I do agree with you. I just don't know if they'd be happy to give more money.
I know, I'm just thinking sort of a buy now, we'll probably ask you to pay later plan.
Great. Well, I
Colin,
think
please.
Donna has largely covered
Welcome.
what we're setting out to do, but maybe I'll touch on just a few points. And first is this notion that a lot of this work was already included in the first final report that came from the Mayor's Leaders Table to Council. And I think what you saw in the final report from the Infrastructure Working Group was this notion that they approached those projects with a whole person approach, this understanding of how is it going to benefit everyone. And I think what we talked about at our last meeting in March is this is expanding on that and getting into that living systems approach. And so while it looked at a whole person last time, there wasn't anything that necessarily bound all those players together. And so Dave's notion of a charter and having people endorse a charter together and commit to a process together really takes it from the whole person to the living systems approach. I think the other thing that is important to note then that we discussed last time is that we're leveraging material that does already exist. And so when we hear about, perhaps some reticence from boards to sign on to new projects, a large part of what exists in what I've been calling an accord or a charter or whatever name it takes, Mr. Sims already pulled together last time. These are commitments that each organization has taken in different words, those guiding principles and values that hold them to their shared vision. When we bring those together as one collective document, I don't believe it will be such an extraordinary task that will give folks too much pause. And then the third piece around our budget, it absolutely does already align with the mandate of NPC. We have existing resource commitments that will allow us to deliver on much of this work. And then we talk about people having skin in the game. There will be a need for in-kind contributions. I mean, the reality of needing meeting spaces, graphic design help, any number of things that folks sort of already have, but NPC doesn't as a startup, will be ways that people need to contribute to the process. So those are sort of three overarching statements. In terms of the work plan itself, it really is built around these two major outputs, the first of which is what I've been calling an accord. And so, how do we get that? Identifying our shared principles, identity, and ambitions. And the idea of having that complete by October 25th is not only to hold our feet to the fire, but we have this moment at the end of October where Nanaimo and Vaia consistently host the State of the Island Economic Summit. And so we have leaders from all across the island here. We'll have eyes on Nanaimo, the ability to show up well, and that I think could be exciting. The second piece, the other major output then, is what I've taken to calling a portfolio of prioritized projects, strategies, and initiatives. And so again, building on what the infrastructure group had with their 26 projects, it's been some time since that report came out. How do we update that? So again, taking work that already exists, checking in with folks while we're going through the charter process about what else needs to be added, and then taking it that extra step of the living system, saying how do each of those feed into one another, not just sit in isolation. And so with those two major outputs, spread over 3 phases of work, the first of which runs as quickly as we can get started till the end of October with the accord, then stepping into the portfolio development through a facilitated process, and then making sure that in January 26th, we're ready to launch and take off running with this. And so it's not a overly complicated work plan because at the risk of being naive, so much of this already does exist. And so we believe it's possible, we have the resources to do it, and that with the endorsement of this table, council, and then the partners, not sure what could stand in our way.
Dave?
It's, as both Colin and you and Donna spoke, I'm always an optimist, but it just seems like it's just an absolute natural outcome. You think about it, like OCP's done them myself, right? And as a consultant and worked with communities, this one that we did here certainly as thorough as you can get. And if you read, I've looked at that document, if you read between the lines, it's giving marching orders. It's just marching orders that are typically done, through city staff and people who in the community to see where we're all headed. But it also gives broader marching orders that most municipalities don't build on. And that's what we're doing here. So I think it's really a terrific idea, Donna, and Colin nicely summarized. The other thing in terms of natural process is, we did that infrastructure work. And when we did that, we did it as an informed cross-section group without community input, right? And because we based it on what we were hearing coming out of Reimagine. And so that was our base. If we didn't have Reimagine, I'd be going, well, how do we engage the community here? But I think this is a natural process and well-described, and I think it can really position Nanaimo in such a significant way and achieve many of the things that notionally John Sewell talked about, a charter in a different form. I love the accord, I think that's the right term, but speaking to the notion that local governments are where decisions need to be made and need to be financed, and we need to, the current system is actually broken to be able to do that. And this is one way to kind of address that brokenness and give much more solid direction beyond reimagine. It really does. Reimagine kind of paints the picture. This is looking at the picture and going, oh, this is actually more than just a picture now. This is actually doing the doing. So I'm really keen. I like it a lot.
Other questions? I know there's got to be other questions. Can I maybe just get feedback from each member about, do you have concerns about the process? Do you see other opportunities that we haven't recognized as part of the process, or do you think those will develop? And then I guess my question back would be, do you feel that there's some, well, I'm gonna ask everybody at this table to commit to the process. So I'm gonna be straight up about that. It's gonna take some work. It's not just gonna happen we're not just gonna hand it to Prosperity and it's gone. This process is really originating and coming through the Mayor's Leaders team. This is my personal feeling, is that I think this is a really impactful piece that we are currently missing that ties all of the work we've been doing over since the inception of the Mayor's Leaders Table as we were heading into COVID. I think this ties all those loose ends together. And to be quite frank, for the organizations that I sit at the tables with, which are a few of these on the chart, that accord, I'm going to leverage to the nth degree. I'm in Ottawa at the end of this month. If I had that, you better believe I'd be sitting at Minister Freeland's desk saying, hey, I've got this right here. I want to talk about our port. And so I'd like to hear some feedback from each person at the table, because I don't want us to miss something critical. And maybe you need to take time to think about it a little bit more as we're starting to fill in the pieces. But let me know what your concerns are. If there's stuff we need to add, have we missed something? We want to be as inclusive as we can. And I do want to just recognize, because I know he's sitting behind me and so I'm not looking at him, but all the work that Mr. Sims has done, he was part of the infrastructure team, worked really closely with us. But I think it's important to realize in the city plan, being able to tie those pieces back and the main goals, I think will also give some leverage for our council when they deal with other levels of government, that they're fulfilling their mandate. And so I think it's important to also give them that to be able to use moving forward.
Mark?
A couple of things. One, on the chart, I'm hoping that perhaps, however, if that's reflected, that the core functions of the groups could be more specific. So like school district, for instance, doesn't mention K-12. And I know that's implied, but like that's a criticism that we get sometimes, is going outside of our function. So I think that's just comment on that. I think that's important, right? What's our job? To build the educated citizen. So that's our function, our main function, to support the community. So the other thing is, and I'm always like, I like to come here because I want to hear, oh, what do you need? Oh, you need housing? Oh, well, we got some land. I got no money, but my skill is to be able to facilitate how we can work through needs if they're the same. And so I want to make sure that whatever the charter, it's not like the work product at the end is going.
The work product will be in the charter. The charter will define basically.
Donna, use your mic. Thanks. Great.
I don't think okay, I'm going to change it to the accord in my mind.
Sorry.
I don't think, no, it's going to take a mental thing for me too. I don't think the accord's going to define the work plan. The work plan will be attached and it will be a living document that's constantly changing. But what it will do is actually define the intent of these groups to work together towards major goals. And I think it will say, we believe Nanaimo is X, Y, are these things. And these groups are working together to achieve those goals. And then we'll have a separate work plan that's Appendix A or whatever you want to make it, that's attached, that's a living document that will change and grow as it needs to.
And that's the infrastructure
Yeah,
piece. as
that's
an
the
example of
infrastructure
that.
piece. And what it will allow us to do is the living document piece will allow us that even after the accord is signed, will allow those groups to continue to communicate and work through the living document piece, right? So, because let's be blunt, the living document isn't going to be the be-all and end-all for the next 30 years. What if some other major opportunities come up? We'll be like, hey, we need to go back to the group, to the living document, and say, we have this opportunity, but we're missing A, B, and C, and we can only be D. So how do we add that piece? So that's how, in my mind, I kind of foresee it. And I'm not sure how many other communities have accords or charters on the island.
They don't. This is unique. In fact, this may be fairly unique in the country. It's just something we don't do.
Yeah.
But it's so obvious when we talk about it, isn't it? But looking at the chair of this meeting, the reason we're here is because of you, and communities just don't get it. They do the OCP, say we're done, and that's it. And then there's some implementation of the OCP, but often it's not fully done either. But, you know, there's these steps that acts tell you have to do. Provinces tell municipalities you have to do an OCP, and this is the essential elements. Go away and do it, and then renew it, whatever, every 5 years, whatever the number is, depending on the province. And we're done, we'll wash our hands, right? This is going the next step, and that's what's so exciting about it. But it's so obvious once we sit at the table, right? And that's the best thing, because things that are obvious mean they need to be done.
Well said. You know, I will say I was at a really high-level port meeting this week, talking about Canada as a whole and the importance of getting out of your silo. And how when you stay in your silo, maybe those within the silo grow, but other silos depreciate because there's really only this maximum capacity. And how if you could get out of your silo and create a conversation, we're talking Canada-wide, particularly as we're talking about tariffs, right? That's where our conversation is about, is how you could get out of your silo, how survival looks completely and totally different, and thriving as an entire community makes everybody stronger. And so I love that this conversation, what Dave is saying, is unique, because I believe in leading the conversation, not following the conversation, and I believe in doing it with excellence, not with mediocrity. And so if this is something that we can do that is a leader in our country, personally I was just thinking on Vancouver Island, but if it's something that we can do that's a leader and make us stronger, I think all of the opportunity right now is there for all of us. For all of our groups and the other groups listed at the table, there is massive opportunities right now for us to look at. And I heard you mentioning your international student program. I think I don't know a lot about it, but right away I'm thinking there's great opportunities there for future workforce with the university to feed right into, right? And so I think this is a great opportunity for us, and I love it that we could be the leader in the conversation.
Bob?
I guess I just wanted to add that I love the concept, and I think that it's taking us in the right direction. And I like the fact that we're talking about a timeline that is relatively concise, and that by the end of the year we'll actually have the accord together with the groups that are at the table. My only comment is that I think once the accord is together, I think we need to make it very clear that we're going to talk about specific opportunities, and I agree there's lots of opportunities, but let's keep it to a reasonable number that we can actually pursue, and so we can turn all of the discussion into an action plan that we can realize on. I'm always worried that these things get into a great group of people who like to keep discussing things, but I think we really need to try to turn it into an action group, and that would be my comment, but I love the concept.
I'm very much with go ahead, Richard, sorry. No.
I'm just going to start out with, Donna, I hope I can be like you when I grow up. just the passion and the drive that you have behind this. Really appreciate this and wanting to pull us all together. On a high level, Dave, to your point, makes absolute sense. I don't understand why cities haven't done this in the past. As I go down and I look at what needs to happen, that's where my worry starts coming up. And right now, I appreciate we need to be at that 30,000 foot level on how we're doing it and how we do this. And very supportive of the concept. As I kind of pull down into put on the university hat, helps drive us in making decisions on the programs. We talk about being a regional university and supporting the community and the needs of the community. This type of work helps us define those processes, and with our direction or our objective of making sure that we're training the next generation of workers and people who can come and support this work. Again, now I get into the work that's involved in that. And I think we're all very aware of the transitory nature of the university right now and what we're going through. And so for me, just living in the weeds of that right now, while I appreciate the timeline, I do worry on how the university can resource this, if it's me or if it's a member of my team or somebody else. However, that would be my only, again, getting into the weeds, that would be my concern. However, very supportive. I think it makes absolute sense bringing everyone together under one common goal and making Nanaimo, realizing the potential that Nanaimo has.
I was just going to say that you'd be hard pressed to find someone, I think, who would oppose what's being proposed. It's a natural outgrowth, as many of you already directly or indirectly said this morning, of the Reimagine Nanaimo process, et cetera, all of those things. And so let me just say this to Dave's kind compliment. Never give credit to the person who is there when the flower blooms, when all the gardeners have been doing all the work. But thank you very much. I'm a very I like to think I am a very practical person, so I need to see how it works. I need to see a charter, covenant, accord, whatever.
It's a covenant.
Yeah, whatever works, something tangible. The work plan, I mean, as references are made to Bill and others getting together a list of the projects that are important to the community and tying it all together. And candidly, there is no other body in a sense that can do this realistically. There's several elected bodies in this community. The school district, we have an MP and members of the Legislative Assembly. We have a council. We have a regional district, for that matter. We have various, bureaucracies, et cetera, various nonprofits and so on. But nobody has control. Now, that's one of the problems we faced as a city dealing with the whole housing issue, is that, you put together a health and housing task force, you put together our SPO, but at the end of the day, it has no control, it has no authority, it has no power, and so it's challenging. I think the approach that is being taken here in terms of, yes, we're going to have some staffing, because at the end of the day, worker bees, I love that phrase, always have. We need some worker bees who are going to produce material, something tangible that someone simple like myself can grasp and understand. But I think it has incredibly exciting potential, because we're in a time of, and I don't need to point this out to this intelligent table, we're in a time of great flux. All of the trade systems and belief in the triumph of liberal democracy, what was it? I can never remember his name, the fellow who said the end of history, this article years ago, which turned out to be dead wrong. We're seeing something quite dramatic, and it means, as Dave says, if it's obvious, it needs to be done. Well, it's obvious that we need something overarching to pull it all together, and it can't be in a person, frankly, and it can't be in the individual bodies. It means working as a collective. So this is quite striking. As I say, I want to see more and fully grasp it. It's a lot to absorb. I think anybody who was sitting, listening this morning would be going, oh, well, it would conjure up 1,000 questions and maybe too embarrassed to even ask the questions, or maybe not even the questions aren't occurring to them. They just know there's a level of interest and discomfort at the same time because they're not sure what this actually means and how is it going to play out and what's the impact over the longer haul. But my sense is it's absolutely where we need to go. So, in terms of the work plan to develop the charter, that's you've got it laid out here. There are more things to be said here that need to be said, please.
Well, looking at next steps, does this group feel that we have enough information, the information on creating the accord, which Dave's going to get started on on Tuesday after the long weekend? I'm only giving you the weekend off. And a plan for how implementation is going to happen, along with a chart that we have enough to form a motion to go before council to get their support. I think it's really important that we have council's buy-in. Even though council won't be at necessarily these meetings, I think it's really important for them to understand the need for this process. And that this process, how it can take place and what the expected outcomes are. And so does this group feel that we have enough to make a motion from this table to take this to the next council meeting to get their support? And yeah, I see staff is...
Ms. Ricard.
Thank you, Your Worship, and apologies. My intent was not to interrupt the discussion, but I did just want to mention once the discussion is maybe complete, that we do have a draft motion that we would be happy to share with the table for consideration.
I love it that you're working ahead. Thank you. That's good.
It's a lot of wonderful people sitting next to me as well assisting in this process.
She's very modest and very good.
Okay.
With your permission, I can read that out now. So that the Mayor's Leaders Table, and it's on the screen as well, recommend that council endorse in principle the proposed work plan to develop and implement the Nanaimo Accord as attached to the Mayor's Leaders Table agenda dated 2025 May 16, and return to future council meeting with the draft document for council to consider endorsing.
Sorry.
I think I know what you're...
read things twice.
Yes. You're off. Go ahead, take your time. Okay. All right.
want to say. Okay. Do we feel that that motion is them approving the process as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it saying they may recommend the council endorse in principle the proposed work plan, implement the Nanaimo Accord, and return to a future meeting with a draft document for council to consider endorsing.
I'm struggling with the draft, return to council with the draft document. So
document.
are we
What-
just returning to council with a draft accord? I'm looking for council to approve the concept of an accord is one piece that I'm looking for, but I'm also looking for council to approve the entire process to come up with not a draft accord, only, but to look at coming up with like approving the whole process, which would also have the Appendix A with the draft next steps. Like, I'm looking maybe for the motion to be a little broader to approve the whole process.
I think I know where you're going. Dave?
Yeah, I need to think about that too. It seems to me it could end nicely after 2025, May 16th, because embedded in what we're doing is returning to council. We may do some other stuff that we don't know yet. So the last part, I don't think that's needed. And the focus is on, in principle, the proposed work plan. If we adopt the work plan, we can get on with it and go from there.
Just in terms of the motion, endorsement principle of the proposed work plan, maybe we need to say for, I don't know, something a bit, something that gives someone who's not sitting around this table and has listened to the presentation today, et cetera. In other words, something.
We have to know what we're doing.
Yeah, a little more descriptive. Is there something wording, some brighter wordsmith than me can potentially put in there. Otherwise, I'm with Dave. I think returning to your future council, the draft document for council consider endorsing per se. Bill, you've got,
I think we could say something to the effect of that council endorse the concept of I'm sort of stumbling and bumbling, sorry about that, that council endorse the concept of a Nanaimo Accord as a vision document to define Nanaimo's soul or heart or something, and endorse in principle the proposed work plan, et cetera.
Dave, and
That
then
might be a
Mark.
bit lofty.
Yeah, it's a struggle, and I understand. I wouldn't agree, think that that's, I think we need to leave it. We can't have this starting to define what the accord is, because we haven't done the work. I think, I like this because it is open enough, and it talks about reference the work plan. We don't have to apologize to anybody I mean, that material can be made available if somebody has a question, but to start to define it more here starts to then put a hand behind your back, I think.
I agree with that, David.
Yeah, I like that front end as it is.
Yeah, Nikki.
Your worship, and in case it's helpful, just to advise the table that when this motion comes forward on a council agenda, there will be a link provided to the table's meeting agenda where individuals would be able to then look up the item and look up the work plan and get more background information and context for how the table arrived to the motion and the recommendation to council as well.
Mark, is your mic on to speak? No? Okay, sorry. Richard.
So one of the questions I have, and I noticed you removed that last sentence. So the way I'm reading this is endorsing the work plan to develop and implement the Nanaimo Accord. That piece that we eliminated, going back to future council, do we need to, as opposed to consider endorsing, is it consider adopting by that point? Because in this, they're endorsing the work to get done and develop and implement the Nanaimo Accord, and then we come back with the document for council to consider adopting.
And it's not a draft. It's not a draft document. Maybe
Yeah.
that's what it is that one, the draft document is what's throwing me off a little bit, is like, what is that?
Is it a draft until it gets adopted? That's it is a draft until until we adopt it. And so that's.
So tell me who adopts it?
That's more of a question. I'm wondering, is this something that city council needs to adopt? Is this a process?
At the end of the day, I would say yes. So then through the process, we have to determine, have all of these other groups at the table been to their boards, done their due diligence, everybody else has adopted it, and council is last to adopt it? Or do we have to have council adopt, and so these are technicalities, or does council have to adopt and say, yep, this is what we're supporting? So because really, the city is one member of this bigger group who's signing. So I don't feel like I want council's approval and support of the whole process. We're on board, this is what we're doing. I want it for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons I want it is because I actually want city councilors who aren't in the nitty-gritty work bee group. I want them out talking about that we're creating this with the public, right? And that they're excited about what's happening and look at how the groups are coming together. I want them to be able to, for lack of a better word, boast on that this process is happening here. But the other piece is that the city council will only be one member of this group signing with all the other organizations signing together. So we're not coming back asking them to basically say, yeah, they're the sole owner of the accord. They're a member of the accord. So I think that's where the draft document piece is throwing me off. It's like, so are we asking council then to approve, and then the rest of the groups will sign on? At the same time, all of our boards are going to have to already be at that level where we're all going to agree. And maybe when we all sign at some big, huge celebration where we all publicly sign or whatever we do. But I think that's what's throwing me off.
Dave.
Yeah, it's an iterative process. When it's an iterative process, you can't define all the elements, right? It's just, so as somebody who's done lots of plans and OCPs and stuff for councils, I think it's the work plan that they need to endorse, and that's what we're asking for. And then we're gonna go away and do, but we're not gonna come back and surprise them at the end of it. One of the things that we would do is, as part of an iterative process, is with the counselor who's involved, go back and update, and everybody will update their own groups. And so it's just a continuing this, the whole cycle. It's not just this, it's do as we go along, and then we go boing.
No, but that's why you're right. That's why the last sentence has to be deleted.
The last sentence?
That piece that.
Well, that's why I suggested.
So that's why I'm saying, you're right. That's
Yeah,
why that has
yeah.
to go away. Yeah.
But I think the rest is perfect for guidance. It's guidance we need. And if you think about, when the OCP, staff's given marching orders to complete the OCP, they don't come back in a year and a half time and say, oh, here it is, and present. They go, do this as they're doing it. They're back presenting, and keeping informed.
Mark and then Bill.
would just say that if I was to bring the same motion to my board, the word implement without a final document wouldn't be part of the motion either. It would be I guess it's like, here's what we're developing. Once the plan is actually done, is when the because that's where the board puts up their hand to actually say, yes, we're part of this. Because how can you agree to implement something
When you don't know what it
the
is.
final document?
So that is a good idea, because maybe this motion, when we do the first meeting to have all the people in the room to introduce the concept and how we're going to work on it and get some feedback, we can also give, for those that have to go back to their boards, we can also give a motion like this to them to say, now can you go back to your board and get approval to be working on, and you're right, to propose work on, so that they know it's coming. So you're not just showing up at the end of the day saying, hey, I've been working on this on the side. This would be you're going to, as an example, the school district board, you're at that meeting with your school district board, updating them on what's going on and saying, hey, this is a motion that we took to council. We want a similar motion at the school district. The university's doing the same thing. We're doing the same thing at the port. The airport's going to have to do the same thing to their board. But we give them that to take back to their boards and say, we need you to go back and get buy-in if you're all on site. Get your buy-in from your board. So you're right, it won't be implementation, it will be developing of the plan. Okay, that's great.
And you're coming to all of those meetings. It's a long list.
I already go to a lot of meetings, but as Mark will know, I try to double dip. So while I'm meeting about that, I might be meeting with you about a couple other things.
Bill.
Worship, I think Nicolina had something as well, but
Sorry.
I just wanted to suggest, similar to what Donna was saying, is that, council is sort of helping support and drive the process and the worker bee element of it, but it's council or the city of Nanaimo as a corporation is only one party to this entire document. This is owned by the community as opposed to, so others may choose to sign on or they may choose not to. And so once you get some momentum going on a few key players, like the ones that are sitting at this table, others that aren't sitting here may feel that pressure in a good way to sign on. And I just defer to Nikki now. She had another point maybe along that same line.
Thank you, Worship. Just wanting to make sure that we capture various points that have been mentioned throughout the morning today. And earlier on in the meeting, I was hearing the desire, the plans to return to council with the presentation at some point, or to present information to council. So just wondering if the table would like to reflect that in its motion by possibly adding and to present an update to council at a future meeting. So just putting that out there for members' consideration. Thank you.
I mean, I would expect that, from that perspective, maybe I'm being obtuse here, that when this comes at the council meeting, that Donna would come as a delegation, Dave, et cetera, be prepared to say a few words and explain what this is about in 5 minutes or less, so to speak.
But what I'm hearing is that as part of a motion, you're suggesting that we provide the opportunity for updates. And while I understand where that's coming from, my only thought is that I believe that council gets information every time we meet as a group, do they not? So that's how they would get their updates. I don't think we have to, because right now the motion says that we're, endorse in principle the proposed work plan to develop the Nanaimo Court. I think that verbiage indicates that obviously at some point as a member of the court, we would be coming back to basically have it signed and all that kind of stuff and have updates. So I don't feel that we need to add something because I think it's implied.
I'm inclined to agree with Donna. We just passed a motion at council. Councillor Thorpe, who made the motion that we would have the Prosperity Corp and the others, et cetera, report 4 times a year to council, the SBO, and decided that was too often. And so we've reduced it to twice a year.
Yeah, so I just see different organizations replacing council with the name. I think that's where you're going, Mark. You could easily have the school board, and you could have the Port Authority, you could have MIMI, you could have the Nanaimo Foundation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's simple. That's why this motion's even better the way it is.
I'm going to make this motion. So I move this.
I second it.
Dave seconds. Discussion?
Can I
Questions?
ask what document gets presented? Is it the work plan? Is it the background on charters? Is it both? What's getting presented?
It's all 3 documents. So it will be the chart, it will be the charter background, and it will be the work plan on how we get there as a package. And we'll make that available to other groups who are presenting to their boards as well.
Then can I just express one concern about and I really appreciate the work and I on a personal level agree with it, but I don't think I would want statements about wanting to reorganize how cities are funded.
No, that's not.
Well, it's part of the work that you do. Like you just talk about it. You're not like that's not the reason for it. I
Okay.
caution because it stands out a little bit. And of course, if revenue sharing changed or whatever, because the point I think your points are wrong. Or well, maybe that could impact the university. That could impact the school district in unknown ways. I know this is more about working together than it is about changing how funding works. So I raise that caution.
Dave?
Sorry if I confused you. That's the word charter used in Canada. That's why we don't want to use the word charter, because charter's a misnomer in Canada. It is about changing the financial model. The Accord may indirectly do that as a result of, but it's not part of the work per se.
So then maybe let's agree that Dave is going to edit his document to take out the charter. He'll edit that to take out the charter references and just leave it under Accord, and then it gets rid of that confusion.
This document is meant here just as a discussion. I would never, ever say that this is where we're headed. It's got to be rewritten. And that's why I presented it today, because when I went through, I went, oh, we don't want to be talking about charter too much here, because other people go, oh, that's the John Sewell thing, and they're rampaging and doing stuff we don't want to do.
But we do need to present some background documentation before we go to council and before we go to boards, not with the actual Accord document, but with and so your paper spoke to that. But I guess what I'm hearing Mark say is, can we take out, and a valid point, we could maybe take out, it's not going to be a charter, it's an Accord, so we can shorten it down. But we do need to provide that background documents to council and to each of our boards explaining why we're suggesting it.
All those in favor? Any opposed? None? Motion carries. Well done.
May I just kind of put this away, because it was a defining thing. And once things now start to get defined, you turn the page and then you define it.
Bob?
We're on to housing?
All righty, we're on to housing.
Well, I guess I'm sorry to be a little pedantic on this, but I do want to drag this group back to a discussion on housing. As a quick recap, they did an excellent report back in January of last year, presented to council regarding how Nanaimo can address the whole homeless issue and other challenges that we have around housing, and recommended Housing First as a new strategy. This group talked about that and suggested that we move that forward to council. That was some months ago, as I recall, and we are no further ahead. The one thing that has taken place in the background is a small group of us, including Dave and Colin, have been meeting to try and expand the discussion in the community around housing, and we hope to make that a more regular event and to be a little more formal about it. But I really think it's important that we revisit that whole discussion at this table and decide how we can move it forward. My understanding is it landed with the SPO to come back with some kind of a comment or discussion, and to the best of my knowledge, nothing has come back. However, the challenge has become more urgent in our community and in communities throughout the country. I mean, clearly it was a big topic in our national election, but let's face it, I don't think we're going to see the action that we need to see until our city takes the lead and pushes other levels of government to make those changes. So I just invite a further discussion at our table, and maybe Dave, you want to make a comment on that?
Dave?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks. And we haven't actually done a tag team on this, so thanks for that, Bob. I think I could say that, yeah, I was disappointed I haven't heard back. There was a council motion that went to SPO, and they were asked to look at the first 4 recommendations that we put forward. I haven't heard anything back, and that's probably almost a year ago now, I think now. That being said, one of the things that I'm doing, I've presented just recently to Elder College, quite successful, lots of feedback. It's amazing how much energy and concern there's out in the community. People said, well, we haven't, wow, we've been concerned about this, but no one seems to be talking about it in this kind of way. And you're talking about some actions, and we want to be on board. So, 80 people at the Elders College, more than half of them want to sign up and join a group that's going to actually address this. I thought that was quite interesting. What I was going to say, though, is I'm doing a presentation to provincial conference for planners next week or next month on this issue, and in that talking about homelessness, and then with that group an action plan so they can take back to the municipalities. Fundamentally, what I found since, and I've been working on homelessness now for a couple of years, is that this isn't obviously just about homelessness. This is about housing, and that's why it's housing first. Housing first, I call it housing first plus in terms of homelessness, but it is housing first basically for our community, because on the street we've got over 70% of the people that are on the street, and the number probably is over 1,000 now, and they're not just always on the street, like they're couch surfing, they're living in a vehicle, that kind of thing. But of that number, over 70% of them have lived in Nanaimo for 5 years plus. So they're ours, 1. 2, 50% of them are on the street because they couldn't afford housing. So that's like 350 people on the street because they couldn't afford housing. If we had affordable housing, they wouldn't be on the street. The numbers drop significantly. The problem is when they're on the street, a lot of them succumb to the influences that are on the street because they spent 5 nights cold and in the rain and tired, and they haven't eaten, blah, blah, blah. And guess what? Somebody comes along and says, hey, I got something for you. They take it, and I can take them down a really bad rabbit hole. So all of that to say that the more work I do on this, the more I discover that this is about housing for workers. This is about housing for families who are precariously housed. And the numbers that I'm seeing now are like 40% of people that are in residences that are housed are precariously about to be out and on the street, except for, if cost of living goes up by, I saw one number, like $200 a month for a family, they're potentially on the street. These are scary numbers. The other number is, and I'll leave it at that, which is a scary one in and of itself. Service industry, making minimum wage, it's $16.75 now or something like that. It's $34,500 a year is your income. CMHC says, as we know, 30%, no more than 30% of disposable income should go to housing. Those people that are in Nanaimo, this is a Nanaimo number, spend 58% of their income to stay with a roof over their head. And a lot of that roof over their head is shared with somebody else. Not by choice, but because of necessity, otherwise they're living in a vehicle or some such thing or a tent. So it is unfortunately getting worse, and there's no question, the city's been really working hard with BC Housing, and Melenas and others are building housing. We're building, you see them going up, but the number being built are often very specific to particular need at the front end. It's the women with families. 90% of the women who are 90% of the families that are in a shelter situation in a family situation. 90% of them are women-led families, for instance. That kind of stuff. That when you dig into the numbers, it's really, really troubling. And so when we talk about housing first, and we talk about the need to address our homeless population, we're talking about our fellow citizens who are just about close to slipping out the door and ending in that situation. So my focus to end it is, particularly now, after all of this that I've been working on, is keeping people housed. That's the focus for me now. Not the only focus, but the primary focus is to keep people from entering the street. And that means affordable housing. It may be subsidized, it may be new rentals, whatever it is, but focusing on that, because if they get on the street, as I showed you, $21 million in 2023 for all levels of government to keep them on the street, not to take them off the street, to keep them on the street. So if we keep them housed and we address the ones in the street, we'll be like Finland. I got a great graph of Finland. They were in our situation 30 years ago. It didn't take them 30 years to get the numbers down, but it took them a good 15. And now if you look at the chart, they were now we're down here, people are housed and they've got some homeless, but they were the same situation, they were ahead of us. They had homeless numbers like ours 30 years ago. They were in really bad shape for a whole bunch of reasons. Now there's a country that's really turned itself around, including homeless. They can do it, so can we. Thank you.
Okay. A couple of things. I'm going to ask Mr. Vicar at some point, or some staff, to send around the link to the city website in that particular section where the SBO reported to council recently, which will give you some comfort, where reference is also made to expanding the rent bank program, which is administered, so that you're going to lose your accommodation. You can go to the rent bank and you can get a subsidy for a month or 2 or 3 or whatever to keep you in. The other thing is, in fairness to the province and the city too, through the Heart and Hearth program, we've just opened the units at 1300 Island Highway, 1030 Victoria Road's on board. The units at the old, the predecessor to Eden Gardens, et cetera, Travelers Lodge are just about to open. So in there, well, it's basically 200 plus units fairly quickly. Now, it's taken a long time to get there, and I'm not going to pretend it hasn't, but there is some reason for, how shall I say, gratitude and optimism. Is the problem still enormous? Yes. Does it appear that the government is starting to acknowledge this? Well, I mean, at the horror show in Vancouver at the Lapu Lapu Festival, the Premier's happily announcing 10 secure, involuntary secure involuntary beds, as I call them, etc. And then now it's 150. Now, that's not going to solve the housing problem, but it is going to. The fact that those kinds of commitments are being made now, I think, reflects the fact that it's finally moved up the political agenda. And this time, as Bob mentioned in the federal election, finally it started to get some play, not necessarily in a positive way, but in a sort of negative way. We got to, get the criminals off the street kind of thing. But there was also a recognition that the street disorder relates back to a lack of supportive housing. Dave's point, though, about trying to keep people in, and in fairness, John McCormick has emphasized this, that one of the things we do have to be very conscious of is that there are these people who are in that precarious position where they literally can slip into homelessness, because the image of homelessness is, and that's why I don't generally describe it as a homelessness issue, is that they are, all drug addicted, brain injured, traumatized, mentally ill, et cetera, when in fact it's just good old-fashioned poverty. And some of them may well have some degree of what the things I've just mentioned, but would otherwise be housed if they could afford housing and would be able to survive. And they might not be your best tenant or your best neighbor, but they won't be on the street you know, freezing to death in the winter and dying of heat stroke in the summer. So I appreciate what you're saying. How much more? I mean, I think it's probably worth having a bit of a conversation. We could bring Bill Christie back, perhaps, to talk about where we're at as well.
Your Worship, I was thinking along the same lines. You know, the table will recall that we've been, you know, a number of city staff have been in front of the group, just sort of going over the work that we've done and continue to do. And, you know, the housing needs assessment reflects much of the commentary that Dave referenced there as well. And now that's just more recently, that's now a provincial requirement to do these housing needs assessments on a frequent basis and develop the need for housing. One of the things, because we were hearing this, what's the city doing kind of question a number of times, staff developed this sort of overarching document, and I'll ask Ms. Bonigal to share that when she has a chance. But that was a good thing, but this sort of summarizes all the work that we're already underway with and sort of split it up into upstream, midstream, downstream kind of work as well. One of the frustrating things for me, I'm speaking now as a bureaucrat, Mark referenced that one, but is that we want affordable housing, we want this, we want that. We also want environmental sustainability, we want earthquake-proof buildings, we want accessible buildings, we want, all of the things which we can all surmise add a whole bunch of costs. So that, we went from building wartime houses at the end of World War II, which were tar paper shacks that were going to, a bit better than that, we're going to last 20 years, are still in existence in many parts of Canada. But we didn't have quite the tough building codes as we did then.
Yeah, and Christy did a wonderful presentation to council, which could also be shared as well. That would be helpful. David.
Yeah, and I really appreciate it, and I've always said in that report, and I talk about it when at Elder College, the good work the city's doing. There's no question about that. But when I look at what others have done and what can be done in that step that you just described that SBO is doing, that's certainly something that Basel has done in Switzerland, where they have no homeless. And all of Switzerland's the same. But my point is that I think we need a different level of conversation, and we haven't talked about this, but I'm going to raise it too. That Bob raised that notion like a director of housing, and that notion somebody who's tagged to actually just look at those links. I have looked at them, and I can say that I'm not sure how many people have actually been able to do what I've done, because I'm retired and I can do that and I can do whatever I want. So I've done that, and I'm absolutely convinced that there's a way forward here, and it has to do with thinking about housing in a different way. I'll say this, and all my life, unbeknownst to most of you, I'm a private sector guy. I've owned the Bowen Island Pub and Beer and Wine Store, best in BC in 2016, consulting company. I've been a developer. I'm a private sector guy. That's the only way I could retire, because I was good at that. And so I wear that hat, but at the same time, I always wear a social hat. And the reality is, up until the early 90s, certainly into the mid 80s, we had 15 to 18% of our housing was social housing. People were assured that they always had a roof over their head. We are now at 3.7% in Canada. We turned our back on that and said that we've left it we're going to leave it to the private sector. The private sector is absolutely critical to the way our economy works, but there are times when there has to be social initiative, there has to be a strong-arm government to say, you know what, good work, but the private sector has not been able to provide affordable housing. It can do it in, 10 units here and 5 units there as part of a commitment for rezoning or density bonusing, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is we just need to be more comprehensive. And so Good work, Bill. Good work, Mayor. Good work. SBO, in my report, I say, great, we need SBOs, right? That's an important part. But at the end of the day, in the absence of some kind of subsidized, special purpose-built housing that's non-market rental, in the absence of that, we will continue to have people flowing out on the street. The work that's being done now to help get them off the street, keep on doing that. But let's take a look at how we actually, in a fulsome way, keep people housed in a respectful way. So the people like me who spent, most of my dad died when I was 11, factory worker, got rid of his insurance traded in so we could buy a bigger house. He died 6 months later. We're stuck with the mortgage, had to moved into one of those houses you talked about, Bill. Wartime house, thank God, size of this table. I didn't know any different. No one ever treated me differently in those days, right? I went to a school where kids were a hell of a lot richer than I was. No one ever judged me. Here I am, right? So we've got to be open to those possibilities. And I think right now we're not, and we need to be. And that's why we need a director of housing, something like that can stand back and say, we can address that element of the community, and that will keep people housed in a respectful, dignified way and keep them off the street. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Well said. I completely agree that our staff's done a great job of working within the scope of their other responsibilities. What we need, though, if we really want to be serious about this, is somebody to drive that process, whose sole focus is to push forward, push other levels of government, find creative ways to produce this housing at a faster rate. And in my view, it has to be a sole focus for somebody in a senior role. Because without that, quite honestly, I don't see how we're going to make progress with this challenge. So again, I say to this table, I think it's something we can address, and I think we need to build community support around it. But without it, we're not going to win the battle, in my opinion.
Oh, I just have a technical question for Mr. Sims, who brings up a really good point. And since, you know, my day job is in the development industry, building costs are through the roof. And a lot of it is driven by code. Are there any exceptions within the code? And I get that the intent of the code is to make, life safety is a main concern, accessibility is a main concern. But I think all of us sitting at this table know some of the recent code changes to making multifamily 100% of all units being able to be converted accessibly. That's taken down the number of units by 10% in any major development. Like, none of those things, they all conflict with the intent of the province to create more housing. When you create codes that actually reduce the amount of housing you can have on a property. So my question is, and this is a very naive question, is something I should probably know the answer to, are there any exceptions that we should be looking at with respect to housing and codes, where whoever that defining body is, who I'm presuming is the province, would make exceptions? And so the things I'm thinking about are, maybe rather than big developments for housing that are, 5, 6, 7 stories, whatever they're going to be, maybe they're townhouses, so you eliminate things like elevators, but you allow like a 3-story walk-up. Right, so that, because for elevators are big costs up front, and then they're required under the BC Technical Authority to have big operating costs where you have to have licenses and inspection. They're expensive. I'm just wondering, and this is my naivety as a developer not knowing, are there exceptions where you're promoting the idea of the need is housing, but we look at it in a different way where not the life safety stuff that saves your life, but maybe the other added pieces are reduced to allow for greater opportunity in the housing? Because you're quite correct. Those houses from the 1950s, like, they're still all standing. And people are living in them quite, in a healthy manner. We're not putting in asbestos now. So, I mean, I just wonder, is there...
Your Worship, I'm not the expert in building codes. Okay. I really am not. But I can reflect that from an equity lens, you can't, I wouldn't believe you could build something, you know, I guess we've made the exceptions for these sort of temporary modular things, but there's still some basic life safety things.
And I'm not talking about compromising that, but let's be blunt, if you're a builder and you're building multifamily, the only choice you have on saving costs is ultimately finishes, right? So you're using a cheaper flooring and maybe a cheaper cabinet, but the structure of the building itself is no different whether I'm building a condo to sell at my top market value or if I'm building housing to house people who are homeless. There isn't, in the base building itself, there is zero difference. I'm still sprinkling every room, I'm still doing the same electrical service, I'm still drywalling it. The only difference is the finish, and the finishes are a very small portion of a base building build. So I'm just saying, if part of the impediment is cost, and you're saying, you know, the private sector was expected to absorb, I'm speaking for the private sector, we can't absorb it because the costs don't change to us. It's not like I can go and buy drywall, the same drywall, for less money based on what the intended use of the project is.
Before I go to Dave, let me just say, and you may have heard this already, the province has proposed, I think it's 3 stories, in multi-story buildings now, instead of having 2 fire escapes or stairwells, they would reduce to 1. And the pushback from the firefighters is enormous, and I get it, but, and this may sound harsh, and I'm conscious of this being a publicly recorded meeting, this is not 100 years ago with a couple of horses pulling a wagon full of water and aging firefighters across town to put out a fire in an area that's going to burn to the ground because it's all wooden buildings, etc. This is not the Fernie of before the 2 great fires that led them to create this beautiful downtown that has all stone and brick now, because they figured out that if the buildings were all wooden, that this was going to be a disaster again. The concept that you make every unit accessible is preposterous. We are not all going to end up in wheelchairs with walkers or poles or decrepit, etc., or injured, whatever the excuse may be. And it is adding ridiculous amount of cost to it. And as Donna pointed out, the structure is the same. And the government to do something around the building code, it wouldn't be that challenging to do it. There's a national code and provincial as well, and we're required to, you know, enforce it municipally. We don't have control over it per se. But yes, and I think you got it, rubber hits the road. I mean, I keep saying to folks, and mine wasn't quite as bad as Dave's situation, but you know, there were 3 of us in a bedroom probably by 10 by 11 when I was growing. It was a nice new house, by the way. It was built the winter my mother was pregnant with me. My father was prospering, but he was dead within 5 years, so that kind of switched things off. But it was a very nice modern home, up to date, under 1,000 square feet, 3 bedrooms in beautiful Coombs. But I didn't think I was deprived either. And, you know, living on the cot and my brother's in the bunk beds in this tiny house by modern standards. And if I'm homeless now, if the alternative is being homeless or living in a tiny home or living in a mini micro suite or whatever, I think I'll take that over an accessible suite in a building with a functioning elevator, assuming I don't have mobility issues, et cetera, but that's a conversation that's not going to get settled at this table. Dave?
That's what counts.
It's very frustrating, because, well, Obama popularized it, and I use it all the time. Don't let this pursuit of the perfect stand in the way of doing the good. And that's to some extent what we're doing now, or not doing now.
If I may, I just can't leave this alone, I'm sorry. I think that really exemplifies why we need to do things differently. I mean, if Donna chooses to build 100 units of housing, and yet Bolinas decides to use it and does it under the auspices of BC Housing, it'll probably cost us 25 to 30% more than what you will build. And that's the ridiculousness of some of the, you know, provincial government guidelines. So as a community, if we really want to be a leader in providing housing, we have to drive the agenda and push other levels of government to consider alternatives that make sense. So we need to have a very strong position and be determined about it. So again, I would encourage this group, if we could keep this on the agenda and see if we can find ways to make some progress each time we meet, that maybe this can be part of our new accord going forward as a community, that we can be more humanitarian about housing our fellow citizens. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Next
May I
schedule-
say something?
Yes, please, Dave.
Really appreciate the way we can have these conversations. Thank you.
It's a great group. Lucky to have each other. Anything for the roundtable? If not, sorry, Mark, please.
I can just maybe give an update. We received our capital plan response letter from the Ministry of Education, and unsurprisingly, this government does not have, I think, many resources available to it right now. So our main objective was replacing ND. It was a no. We're preparing our next capital plan submission, which will go in June. It will have ND at the front of the list. It will have a childcare facility that we've talked about to build on the Dufferin site to serve hospital employees' kids, so it's kind of separated from the school district. We've been expanding our in-house childcare services, so before and after school care. September, we're gonna have 260 spaces that are being delivered by our own employees now, as well as we continue to expand our daycare that's third-party provided as well. So some things rolling forward. Again, disappointment on ND, but there's not many approvals across the province right now. I think it's pretty tight. One thing, I don't know if there's much interest here, is what they've done provincially is they've collapsed, they've taken major capital out of the hands of individual ministries for the biggies, and now they've centralized it. We haven't seen a change yet, but we're actually hoping for a school district, when you think of the size of our projects, they're kind of relatively small in the sense, like a high school is going to cost 100 million, but a hospital is going to cost how many billion? So we're hoping that what they call slippage, as in like the hospital is slow on the uptake and there's capital dollars there. We're hoping some slippage gets sent our way, but we haven't seen anything like that. But that's just so not great news, but we'll see.
I'm impressed you can build a high school for $100 million.
Well, no, sorry, 150. We'll go on 150 if it's going to be.
So 300 then.
It's going to be right size. That's right.
More if it's in Surrey. Yeah, well, let me say this, and I'm sure ratepayers listening to me say this will get all panicked, but I think we are spending, if we can spend $1 on debt and debt servicing as allowed by provincial law, we're at 13.5 cents. So if things get really bad, the reality is, notwithstanding the concerns around tax increases annually, the city of Nanaimo in and of itself is in a position to spend money on capital expenditure. Not that we will or are or are promising, et cetera, but we're in good shape compared to many other municipalities. And that, you can argue that relatively conservative fiscal approach over time creates its own problems in terms of lack of infrastructure or resistance to needed infrastructure when its need becomes obvious or overdue. I won't mention any particular projects, of course, but having said that, we are in a position that if the economy does turn down over a longer period of time, yes, we're in a position to go out and borrow and make some stuff happen, keep people employed. Because as Mr. Horbaczewski pointed out to me this morning, or to all of us, I guess, the impact of the cuts to foreign students and at post-secondary institutions across the country is certainly rolling out, positions disappearing, programs disappearing, people unemployed, and what is it, the old joke, it's a depression when it's it's a recession when your neighbor loses their job, and it's a depression when you lose your job, and that's unfortunately where things can end up. Anyway, somebody give us a good of the order thing before we get on to the next meeting date, something cheerful to say. Donna.
Well, I'll share something cheerful. Since we last met, hopefully all of you saw that we did our groundbreaking at Duke Point for our $130 million project. I was in meetings in Vancouver this week. I'm really pleased to see that all final contracts have been signed and that we will have machines on site starting next month. Yes, super excited about that. And excited to say that in my meetings this past week, we're going to accelerate the pace into the next phase over and above what my anticipations were. This project's, the dates they've given me are 18 months to build out, moving directly into the next phase, which will mean good paying jobs for our people in our community. And so I'm really excited about what that means for us as a community. So there's some good news of things that are already happening here. My other thing from the port is you maybe saw a cruise ship in port yesterday. That was our second of the year. We have 2 more coming. We have 10 signed up for next year already, with a possible 16 coming next year. So what the port is facing is that conversation of, do you know when you plan for all these different outcomes to happen? Suddenly they're all happening at one time, where Hello Ferries is at capacity, and we've got cruise ships that want to come to Nanaimo. I actually personally met with the captain, as did the mayor yesterday. It was great to hear his feedback on coming to Nanaimo and how easy it is to dock here and whatnot. I think, but leaving this meeting, I don't want to leave thinking about NDSS, because that just for me adds, I need to go advocate for Mark. So I'm going to be there advocating as I graduated from there. But leaving on this thought of, a lot of these things that we've been working on, they're starting to happen. And there are lots of opportunities for all of us sitting at this table, and how we capitalize. I think great things are going to continue to happen here, and it will affect everyone, even those we talk about, the homeless, and how we're going to deal with housing and their situation, the housing first policy. I think that the opportunity is here, and whether we talk about it publicly or not, because we seem to be really bad about doing that, these great things are starting to happen here. So that's my little upbeat and what's happening at the port.
I like it. Richard.
Although potentially not as impactful as a $130 million project or 16 potential cruise ships. Just reminding everyone that this weekend, if you're around, Nanaimo is going to take back the world record Nanaimo bar. So this, just for a sense for you guys, this Nanaimo bar that's being made will be 1,100 pounds and 70 feet long by 3 feet wide. So it is a massive, they're building it in sections, and then the students have created, working with the trade students, they've created a frame. So everything is being built there, and then they will pour the chocolate over top to bring everything together to make the world's largest Nanaimo bar. Come out, have a piece of Nanaimo bar. Pieces are free.
Where's it gonna be?
It's at the Trades Discovery Center.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so please, if you can, and thank you for the city for their support. We have many great sponsors who are doing great work on this. The objective for this was to purchase 2 new stoves for the culinary arts students. That the old ones are decades old, and we've raised enough to replace those. So yeah, so things are going great from that perspective. So on the 17th, please come down to campus or up to campus and hope to enjoy some Nanaimo bar. Great question. It's in the morning.
11.
I believe
10:30 is a photo op.
Yeah.
11, and by noon it should be
Wrapped up.
cutting.
Yeah. Or
They'll
yeah.
be
Yeah.
cutting pieces.
Yes.
Dare I say sweet? Yes. Next meeting date, July the 4th. Okay. And a motion for adjournment. Mr. Moss, Ms. Hayes, all those in favor? Any opposed? None.